Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar, Growth Through Acquisition, Finding the Right Fit. My name is Nicholas Goods. I'm one of the co-founders of Succession Link. The year is off to a great start. First off, I wanted to acknowledge and thank all of you for being members of the Succession Link community. It's amazing to me that we have over 500 attendees on today's call. For those of you that have been with us from early on, you've seen firsthand the growth of the platform, the enhanced features, capabilities that we've rolled out over the past few years, the addition of insurance agents and CPAs to join the community and network and collaborate with other members, and most recently, our job listings and office finder feature. My good friend and business partner, Phil Flakes, and I launched Succession Link in 2013 to fill the obvious void that the industry faces with respect to succession planning, and what's now an industry-wide trend to grow inorganically through acquisition. Last year alone, we saw the platform take in 14,000 new members just on Succession Link, 600 which were sellers looking for a buyer for their business. Our total membership now exceeds 43,000 users. There are only 700 financial planning firms in the U.S. that manage in excess of $1 billion in client assets. These firms are in a position to dominate the acquisition space given their size, scale, and cash flow. However, it's the underserved middle market that benefits the most from Succession Link, which you'll soon hear from one of our panel members today. These numbers are a true testament and validation to the need and value that Succession Link community provides. And again, I can't thank our members enough for the continued support, feedback that we receive every day. We look forward to even more exciting news in the weeks to come as we continue to be the largest digital marketplace connecting advisors on their quest for succession, growth, and so much more. With that, I'm excited to introduce our panel for today. Derek Bruton is the president of Chalice Financial Network. He's a 29-year industry veteran and has served in senior executive positions with leading RIA custodians such as Charles Schwab, TD Ameritrade, and LPL Financial. He has led the recruiting of over 10,000 financial advisors in his career and has assisted with the strategy and growth of over 20,000 advisor businesses. He graduated from Stanford University and played basketball for Stanford and professionally in Japan. He serves on the board of directors of the Invest in Others charitable foundation and is involved in other philanthropic efforts in the San Diego community. Vance Barse. Vance began his career in the financial services industry in La Jolla, California at Altegris Investments, where he served as regional director of intermediary relationships. After nearly a decade in this role, Vance partnered with Manning Wealth Management, a registered investment advisor, to leverage his expertise and serve families and individuals. Prior to Altegris, Vance was a corporate officer and administrator for a behavioral health care firm in La Jolla, where he directed strategic growth initiatives for corporate strategy. Vance holds a bachelor's degree in neurobiology and neurophysiology from the University of Maryland, where he served as a Howard Hughes Medical Institute Fellow, studying the onset and progression of Alzheimer's disease. Vance was also a member of Golden Key International Honor Society, and Vance is a registered representative with Commonwealth Financial Network. Gentlemen, how are you today? And thank you for taking the time to join us and provide insight to the Succession Link community. Derek, I'll kick it over to you to start things off with a few comments.
Yeah, well, thank you, Nick. I appreciate that. I think it's important to note for the audience that I'm the only one that submitted a picture from the last 12 months or so. Vance and you both took the opportunity to send in high school photos. So just to be clear, I thank you, Nick, for inviting me to the call today. It's great to be a strategic partner with Succession Link, and Chalice looks forward to doing a lot of stuff together with you. Nick invited me to the call today to hit on a few things. I'll be very clear with the audience. One thing I have not ever done is I haven't been an advisor that's gone through a transaction either on the buy side or the sell side. I have been involved in with the custodians, as Nick pointed out, and some major corporations where we've done some big M&A work, and I've been involved in those integrations. But I can't say from personal experience that I've done what Vance has done, and he'll comment on as well. But what I can say is in working with firms like TD Ameritrade and certainly at LPL Financial, I've played witness to a number of transactions that have occurred and actually oversaw the M&A business and the business where we brought buyers and sellers together at LPL Financial. So I think I can bring some experience to the table for our audience of what I've seen out there that's worked and quite frankly, a lot of things that haven't worked. And I think one can learn quite a bit from both perspectives. So that's what I hope to bring to the call today. And today with Chalice, we're very involved in helping advisors in three kind of main areas. One, and I call it FVP, sort of like MVP, but with an F as in Frank in the beginning. And that's in helping buyers and sellers find each other and helping people value each other. And then also lastly, helping people pay for a transaction, FVP. And I think that's important. It's the foundation of any good and also any unsuccessful transaction, that people, know where to find the right buyer or seller, then how to appropriately value one's business. We all know, and you all have read about people that have overpaid for businesses, in some cases underpaid. Seems like nobody's absolutely happy about it. And then lastly, if you found the right partner and you've got a good valuation, both parties are happy with, the last part of this is paying for it. Where do you find the capital? Is it debt or equity? And because the world has changed quite a bit over the last several years, there's ample opportunity for capital partners out there, but they're often going to look at the first two, how you found the person, whether it's a good fit or not, and then the valuation process. So I'll kind of stop there, but those are the things that I think are most important and at the foundation of any good transaction.
Yeah, I'd certainly agree with that. And thanks, Derek, for the insight and the feedback there. And again, the title of today's presentation is People, Technology, Culture, Clients. And I'm really excited that we have Vance Barse on the line with us. He's been a Succession Link member for the past couple of years and has had a tremendous amount of success networking with other people from the community, but also on the acquisition front. He recently acquired a business of another Succession Link member. So Vance, you've been on the platform for a few years. As it relates to people, technology, culture, and clients, tell us a little bit about how these aspects played a role throughout your acquisition. And why don't we start off with the people component?
Sure, Nick. The industry typically discusses transactions with an emphasis on buyer and seller, but there were 7 parties that helped implement my successful transaction, and they were, number 1, the seller, number 2, yours truly, the buyer, number 3, the facilitator, which was Succession Link, number 4, the attorneys, and they're always fun. While the seller and I had developed a lot of trust, it's smart to protect your interests just in case the unexpected happens. There were 3 integral parts of the transaction where attorneys came in. They were the non-disclosure agreement, the buy-sell, and the non-compete. Number 5, the transition team, or what I like to call air traffic control. They guided the seller's plane to the runway to land, if you will. Number 6, the integration team, and that's what I call ground control. They directed the seller's plane to the gate to deboard the passengers. I am very fortunate to have these teams at Commonwealth because they are fantastic. I would mention these folks by name, but I didn't get their permission before this webinar, and I don't want to get a call from one of their attorneys. But if they're listening, they know who they are. And last, but certainly not least, number 7, my firm's operations team. I am an independent advisor who is part of an ensemble practice that has acquired practices before. So my operations team is highly versed in the nuances of making a smooth transition. So in a nutshell, Nick, there were several parties who helped make the transaction successful, and each had a vitally important role.
Got it. Yeah, I certainly agree. And we see that all the time from users of Succession Link. It's all about the people. Without the right people on the bus, it's hard to get the job done. Tell us a little bit about the technology piece, how you navigated that, and did the seller have similar technology? Did you have to do a lot of changes? Was it difficult as it relates to the client transitioning and so forth?
Great question. The seller was with a broker-dealer that had virtually no client-facing or advisor-facing technology. In today's technology-driven world, this may seem hard to believe, but the seller's broker-dealer was still compensating advisors with handwritten checks. Commonwealth is the opposite. I have the latest and greatest technology, and that helps me better serve clients. So the seller liked that we had the technology to quickly draft paperwork for client transition, and that saved a lot of time. Most importantly, clients found great value in our technology because it allowed them to upload tax returns, estate planning documents, balance sheets, insurance policies, etc., all of which they can access at their fingertips in one central hub. And during client meetings, I commonly pull up these documents to demonstrate why I'm recommending certain strategies and show them the math that justifies the recommendation. Having these documents in a central location also helped expedite financial plans, which, Nick, for many of the clients, was the first tangible plan they've ever had. And lastly, despite living in San Diego, the majority of the families I serve are not local. So I travel to them, and the technology enables me to show these documents in those meetings. And actually, speaking of great technology, you touched on this earlier, Derek. One point of intrigue with Succession Link is the practice valuation tool that you provide members. This is a great resource for negotiations between sellers and buyers. There's actually another advisor whose practice I almost acquired last year. I've known him for years because he was a former client of mine when I was an investment consultant. And the long and short of it is that we had a very trusting relationship, and he kept telling me it was not about price, emphasizing that it was all about fit. And as it turns out, while it might not have been all about price, it was largely about price. The valuation tool on your website confirmed the valuation numbers I had worked out, and I ultimately passed on that opportunity.
Yeah, thanks for the feedback there, Vance. Certainly very insightful. Talk to us a little bit about the culture. Did you, I guess the culture when transitioning to clients, how did that change, or was there anything that you can note on that?
Sure. The seller and I both operate with a white glove, client-first philosophy, and we both approached the transaction, Nick, with a steadfast commitment to a mutual alignment of interests. I am, as you know, a huge proponent of the mutual alignment of interests because ultimately a successful transaction is done with the client's best interest at front of mind. Given that the advisor and I clicked so well, there really was no mismatch in culture. But that being said, if the seller and I had to rely on an independent party to pair us as a match based on the on-paper descriptions of our businesses and, to your question, culture, I don't think that we would have ever been introduced. And there are a few reasons why. First, the seller was commission-based, having sold A-share mutual funds and individually issued municipal bonds and CDs for over 5 decades. I am a fee-based advisor, and I use a broad range of investment products. I also do flat fee planning, which the seller had not provided. Number two, the seller was a broker, if you will, who specialized in products and underemphasized planning, whereas I use tax returns and estate planning documents as the very foundation upon which the planning process is built. And number three, the seller was at a different broker-dealer and really didn't want to move But when I showed him what is available through Commonwealth and reminded him of his decades-long client relationships, he agreed to move, and it worked. But the point is, on paper, we would have never been matched, but the transaction went so well that in hindsight, it really couldn't have gone any better. And the key during the transition was to slowly build trust and introduce services, strategies, and products to the clients in a way that complemented the selling advisor. And this maintained his legacy and left the clients feeling thankful that he conducted deep due diligence on multiple buyers and ultimately selected me as his suitor.
Got it. That makes a good point there. And Derek, I'd love to get your insight quickly. You spent several years at one of the largest broker-dealers, being LPL. As more and more advisors have been nearing retirement, in your opinion, what are some of the biggest hurdles when trying to play matchmaker from the independent broker-dealer perspective?
Well, the biggest hurdle is, up until I used to be able to say this, but I have to change the way I say it now because of the last couple of months. But up until the last couple of months, we've been in a very, very long bull market. And I saw this in 2007 as well. Sellers are much more close to the vest about their intentions. I mean, up on the screen, you have a 50-to-1 buyer to seller ratio. That's not shocking to me. Buyers are much more open about their intentions. I'll talk in a second about real buyers versus, the whole entire buyer universe, but sellers are not. And so what we did at LPL, and I know that, Nick, you're looking at doing even more at Succession Link, is identifying the criteria for sellers and proactively going out to sellers and introducing them to buyers. Because right now with the bull market, what we've seen is advisors that are, let's say, 70 years plus years in age. They have clients that are on average 2 or 3 years older than they are. They haven't grown their business. They don't have a succession plan. They don't have anybody like a family member or somebody younger in their business that they want to sell the business to. On paper, they fit the perfect criteria for a seller, except they're cash flowing nicely because of the bull market. And they're working less. They're just working less. They're not selling. But as I saw in 08, 09, and we're going to see again because there will be an even bigger correction, these owners of businesses will become sellers very quickly when we see the market turn around. And we certainly saw that in 08, 09. And then where I think this movement's going to be more pronounced this time around is for those business owners that didn't sell in 2008 and 9. They're 10 years older now. So now we're talking 80-year-old advisors that will be looking to sell very soon, especially if the market turns around. And I think it's upon organizations like Chalice and Succession Link to help firms like Vance's to go find and match up those sellers and buyers and be much more proactive than we have in the industry today. And that gives us opportunity, to qualify these buyers as well. Because, I go to conferences and speak at conferences in the past and ask everybody to raise their hand if they were a buyer of businesses. And most every advisor in the audience would, because you didn't want to be the one person who didn't have their hand up mainly. But if you qualified people more, like we do at Chalice, for example, we've partnered with Oak Street Lending, and our buyers are pre-qualified. They're ready to go out and buy. And if a seller sees that, an apprehensive seller, and knows that you're across town, you offer something like better technology like Vance talked about, you offer a great home for their clients, and you're pre-qualified, you have the capital to purchase their firm, that's going to make for a successful transaction, so make for a quicker transaction.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with you. And I think back to the point on the buyer to seller ratio, 50-to-1, if you really look closely, so we have a new listing that comes into Succession Link. And in fact, we had 600 sellers in 2018. The real buyer to seller ratio is actually somewhere around 8-to-1 or 10-to-1 when you take into consideration the buyer's ability to secure financing, the scale to support the acquisition, the desirable location for the seller, so on and so forth. And so a lot of people get scared at that number, but in reality, if you prepare yourself for the acquisition and have these things in order, you're putting yourself in a much better position to actually go through with the transaction. So some of the things here on the screen that I'd like to touch upon, which we kind of already have, is the number of transactions that have happened between 2014 and 18. You know, that number has grown 18% year over year, taking into consideration the aging population of advisors, the market correction, the easier access to capital. And you look at all of these things, you know, put together, and, you know, the acquisition space is only going to keep growing over the years to come.
I agree. And as I said, Nick, you know, we've seen steady growth. I've seen a lot of studies done by Echelon and others that points to this steady growth of transactions. But we haven't seen the hockey stick that we saw in 2009, and I think that's imminent. And for those advisors looking to purchase practices, you know, I highly recommend you delve into Succession Link, that you engage Nick and his team to help you find that correct, you know, that most appropriate seller. Make that introduction. It's not just about the numbers. The numbers are important, the valuation's important, but the fit and delivering on what's going to satisfy the win of that selling advisor is most important. And you got to listen versus then tell them what it's all about. Listen to what their needs are, because every advisor that I've worked with in my career, despite saying they're just the same as somebody down the street, they're entirely different in what their needs are. So listening skills are very important if you're a buyer.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. What other things do you think are to come as we, you know, start 2019 outside of the anticipation of more deal flow? I know 2018, I think there was 181 deals per Cerulli, which is a 7% increase from 2017, which was 168 deals. Which was up from 2016, where we had 138 deals that were noted for that year. What other trends do you see as we move forward here?
Vance, you want to hit that one first?
I think that we are going to continue to see consolidation upon consolidation upon consolidation. That seems to be the trajectory on which the industry has progressed. My big question is, what may potentially happen to valuations of practices should we enter into a recession, or should there be some type of systemic event? And I don't know the answer to that question.
Vance, and I didn't ask you this before. Did you self-finance your acquisition? Was it an earn-out, or were you able to get financing from one of the many lenders that are out there today?
I did it all myself, and I structured the transaction in a way where we had a down payment and 2 look-back provisions, and we ultimately had actually in excess of 100% transition and retention because of the additional assets that came out of the practice. I mean, it really went perfect. It was great.
That's great. That's great.
One of the trends I see is actually cooperating with, if you will, another trend, and that's the movement towards independence out of the wirehouses. Mm-hmm. We're going to kind of see this blurring of what some people call recruiting and other people, would call acquisitions. I think they're going to come together because, as I mentioned earlier, those advisors that are, 10 years older than they were in 2009 and, really living in what was been a seller's market. When this becomes a buyer's market, these advisors will look like recruits to some buyers out there that are already independent, and to others, they'll look like acquisitions. I don't think it really matters. The key here is that, the advisor that's at Morgan Stanley or Merrill Lynch or Wells Fargo today that is 70 years old does not have any sort of succession plan built internally at their firm and really doesn't have any enterprise value that they can offer is one heck of a recruit or acquisition. And I say both because you're going to recruit them over your business and you're going to find that they're going to want to phase out. And if you can package that together and get the appropriate counsel to help package that together, I think that's the real low-hanging fruit in this industry.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that. We've got a few minutes left here for the scheduled time, and I'd like to open it up to a few questions from our members that are joining us today. Derek, we've got one here for you. Given your experience in recruiting in the past, have you seen many buyers move to the seller's broker-dealer or sellers move to a buyer's broker-dealer?
Well, I can tell you the preference always. It's usually driven by the seller. The seller wants to, in order to maintain breakage, I should say retention, prevent breakage, and in order to, ensure the back end of what will be their payout, they want to, retain the same custodian or clearing firm or broker-dealer that they've got today. The buyer, on the other hand, doesn't want to necessarily add more potential inefficiency to their business, and they would like to use whatever custodian they prefer. Quite honestly, I haven't seen a pattern one way or another over the years that I've experienced these transactions where one benefits the other. It all comes down to communication between the buyer and the seller, communication about the transition plan, which in any scenario, there's going to be headaches and there's going to be issues. There's no such thing as a trauma-free transition, so don't ever believe that. But then it comes down to the communication to the clients. And I know people don't like disruption. Inertia is one of your biggest foes out there. But as long as there's a plan that's put in place that shows at the end of the 6 months or whatever that transition period is, that the client and the advisor who's serving that client are going to be better off, that's the right way to go. That's the right route to go. And so I don't think it really matters whether you stay with the buyer's current custodian or the seller's. It just doesn't matter. It's the communication around it.
Got it. We've got several more questions coming in here, so I'm going to pick a few more as our time's limited. What kind of loss is there in transitioning from commission to fee-based? And I'm not sure, maybe Vance, if you've been through the transition of converting your clients, maybe that's something you can touch upon, or?
So I had 100% transition, and there were two clients that departed. One transitioned to the spiritual side. I don't know how to put that on the webinar, but the second ended up consolidating to a wirehouse advisor with whom he had, I think it was a 60-year relationship, and it was not a large, quote-unquote, large client within the practice. So if I exclude that and include additional assets that came from the existing clients in the practice, there was an excess of 100%. And the selling advisor and I really focused on what was in the best interest of the clients, and that was the continuation of his white glove service and all that he had built. And I complemented that by introducing impactful solutions and additional planning strategies. So, I mean, really, I can't say that it was seamless because there are administrative misspellings here and there. I mean, that's just common and part of the transition. But one thing I will never forget is that when the transition was done, he called me and said, Vance, I am having so much fun in retirement that I wish I had done this 10 years sooner. And frankly, Nick, that makes two of us because I'm having a blast too. So there was no concern about a lack of transition on either of our parts.
Another question that came in, one of our members is looking for additional details on look-back provisions, and I think that probably relates to the number or percentage of assets that actually transfer. And I think, Vance, you could probably answer this, and Derek as well. With all the recruiting you did, I'm sure you had similar types of structures when recruiting advisors and making sure that their book came over. So what type of look-back provisions are usually put in place for these types of deals?
Derek, do you want to tackle that, or shall I?
Why don't you go ahead? You're experiencing or you experienced it. Go ahead.
So one of the many moving parts with the acquisition I had was there was the fiduciary rule, which was, all the rave at the time. So we were converting from commission-based on retirement accounts to fee-based. and there was a percentage of a down payment, let's call it 25, and there was a look-back provision 4 months after we inked our deal, and that was to motivate seller to help transition clients to the firm. And then there was a look-back provision 12 months after we inked the deal to pay the remaining percentage due for assets that were retained at the end of that 12-month period. So it was 50% of the balance for the first look-back provision less the down payment. So let's just use easy numbers. Let's say it was $100,000. The first look-back provision was $50,000 less the down payment. And then the second look-back provision was the remaining 50%. Those were not the numbers, but just to keep it simple, that's how we did it.
I may just comment in a different direction. I think the importance of the seller's involvement and the outlining of the seller's involvement after the deal is inked is so very important. And if I look back at some of the less successful acquisitions and retention specifically around those transitions, it's when the seller got an upfront payment that was way too comfortable for them, and then they checked out at exactly the wrong time, and then retention of the client base, suffered because of that. That person, that seller needs to be very much involved, and it has to be laid out in the terms in granular detail, because I think that is one of the more, aspects of an acquisition that really, really plays a part into whether you're talking about what Vance experienced in 100% retention versus some that have just gone completely off the deep end because the advisor took, the first 2 weeks after the transaction to go on that vacation he or she always wanted to go on.
And thanks for that, Derek. There's been a number of questions as it relates to fee versus commission business, how to price it, how to value it. There was a question about our valuation tool within our platform for Premier users. One of the users is having a difficult time accessing that. Please, if you have any questions related to the platform, feel free to email support@successionlink.com, and any one of our customer service agents can assist you with that. I guess as it relates to, this will be our last topic, as it relates to multiples of revenue, commission versus fee-based, are either of you seeing any trends as it relates to that?
As Derek, certainly from our perspective, I mean, you can imagine this is nothing earth-shattering to the audience. The valuations and the multiples on the brokerage side are much, much less than the fee-based side, and the disparity or the delta between the two is widening over time. The industry fully expects that after the DOL dropped their initiative that the SEC or FINRA will pick it up, and they will be pressure to move towards a fee-based business, not to mention everything else in the industry that values a fee-based business and the enterprise value, recurring revenue, all that much higher. So I think you'll continue to see a delta between the two that will widen over time. As far as numbers, I hate to get into the rule of thumb multiples, the 2.5 times and all that. There's so much, and this is the mistake in the industry, that people go off the rule of thumb, that they hire people and perhaps even fire people because they didn't give them a number that's around the rule of thumb in the industry. There's so many factors other than just brokerage and fee, size of clients, loyalty of client base, the age of your clients, when they came on, are they growing, are they taking distributions? All these factors play so much into the numbers, and that's where, Succession Link and your valuation tool can be really valuable.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I know Vance has had a lot of success using the valuation tool as well. And I encourage all the users on the line to actually go in and use it. We spent a lot of time and effort creating the algorithm that powers the tool. And the feedback that we get is pretty incredible from all the users that, they might go out and spend $5 or $10 grand on a full-blown valuation and then compare it to our tool. And they're like, wow, it's within 1%. And so I would say that, if you're talking to another advisor about, merging or acquiring or buying or selling or what have you, this tool is really a great place to start when it comes to figuring out the deal terms. what I'll do is when we send out the replay of this with the slides, I'll have a link for all of our Premier users to take them right to the tool, so they can start using that if they haven't done so. But that's all the time we have for today. You'll notice that I included Derrick's and Vance's and myself, our email addresses on the bottom of the page there. Feel free to reach out with any questions, comments that you might have, and we'll be happy to get back to you. Our next webinar is coming up on February 12th, I believe, which will be covering lending aspects, securing financing, the various options that are out there, structuring the deal. And so we'll look forward to hopefully seeing everybody on that webinar as well. But thanks again, Derek. Thanks again, Vance, for your participation today. And special thanks to everyone who took the time to join our call.